Hello all, and welcome to the June Patch Tuesday webcast. We're going to be beginning in just a few short moments, but before we do, I'd like to remind all attendees that they are currently in listen-only mode, but please feel free to ask questions at any time during the webcast. Our panelists will be answering them during a live Q&A session at the end. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Rob Brown.
Thank you, Heidi. A warm welcome to everyone on this June Patch Tuesday webinar. We really appreciate you joining us for another month, and we hope we can help you to prioritize and understand the risk that you may have in your environment with the vulnerabilities for this month. And as usual, I have two experts in my team that I've invited to join me today. John, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Hey, everyone. John Cassell with Syxsense, Senior Solutions Architect. I've been in IT for some time, specializing in desktop and server operations, a little bit of DevOps, as well as community management. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. And Pete.
Hi there, Rob. Yeah, thanks very much. Hi, everybody. My name's Pete. I've worked for Syxsense as a pre-sales consultant for about 5 years. Prior to that, my previous role, I worked for an oil company where we used a tool that at the time was called Landesk to manage around 4,500 devices. We use the tool for general asset management, software deployment, and of course, patch management.
Fantastic. And hello again. My name is Rob. I'm the Director of Services from our UK head office, and my team are responsible for the delivery of security solutions, one being patch management. And we're really proud to say that over the last 15 or so years, we've deployed over 100 million patches. So I would also like to send a huge thank you to everybody that sent us some feedback from our first webcast. It was really amazing, and I've actually made some notes on what we're actually doing to change the webcast. It is really for yourselves, for your benefit, that we actually give you what you want. So we actually have made a few changes. One, we made it a little bit longer. So you wanted to see a bit more content. So we're adding in some third-party updates. So we're adding a specific section for third-party. There were quite a few questions on the CVSS system, so we're going to include that, as well as Windows 10 feature update support. I know that's causing quite a bit of confusion right now with the feature update and the patching, and are they the same thing, and what the roadmap for those look like. We actually were asked if we can include some Linux and macOS content. That's not something in my direct expertise, but that is something we will work to get in the next few months to bring up the highest, most vulnerable Linux and Mac OS vulnerabilities. And we had a lot of questions that said, can we send in questions if you are unable to attend? Absolutely, you can. This is recorded. So if you can't attend live, send in your questions anyway, and we will answer them right at the end. Okay, so we had a huge Patch Tuesday released yesterday, but what I'd like to do first is to explain the release cadence, because there is changes being made. Microsoft have announced they are making changes to this. The first Patch Tuesday of a month actually occurs in the first Tuesday, and that is reserved for non-security Microsoft Office updates traditionally. And then in the second Patch Tuesday, which is the second Tuesday of the month, there you have your security updates. And we actually received over 100 updates, 129 specifically, security updates for all of the Microsoft operating system systems and software. But the news that we want to bring is the .NET Framework. .NET Framework used to be reserved for the third Tuesday of the month. So it was the third Patch Tuesday of the month. And actually, Microsoft has decided to pretty much suspend that for now, based on the this is, what we're finding ourselves, everyone's working from home with the COVID-19. So there is a security update from the third Patch Tuesday. It's going to be moved into the second Patch Tuesday. That will bump the numbers up, and it cause a lot of headaches for a lot of IT professionals who are trying to do a lot of patching in such a short period of time. And then, of course, we've got the outer band and the 0 day, and that can happen at any time. So at any point when there is a vulnerability that needs to be urgently resolved, that is what we call an outer band, and it really can happen at any point. So there's big news on the .NET framework front. Now, we don't know what happens to the non-security .NET framework updates. These traditionally are entry points for a lot of viruses and ransomware. So if it isn't a security update, is it not included? We don't yet know. So we will bring that to you as soon as we find out. We'll let everybody know. We'll put it on our news, but on our news page on our webpage. So based on the feedback, we've decided to put a little slide together for third parties for you. So John, would you like to let us know what you've been working on?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to recap as well from the previous Patch Tuesday webinar, definitely to highlight that it's not all about just the OS updates. Third-party updates are just as relevant. And again, to reiterate this statistic, because it is extremely relevant, when looking at Windows devices alone, the OS updates only account for 20% of the vulnerabilities. 80% lie with all the third-party vendors, and that it's not really a well-known statistic, but most should definitely take that into account because they are just as important to remedy those potential vulnerabilities. Specifically within the last month, in fact, just the last couple days, the most critical would be Adobe there on the far left of the slide. They have released patches for 4 critical flaws in Flash Player as well as its FrameMaker software. And these aren't just for Windows, but it also applies towards Mac OS, Linux, and even Chrome OS. To put it in Adobe's words, for these different vulnerabilities, successful exploitation could lead to arbitrary code execution in the context of the current user. So these should definitely be prioritized just like any other update, not just focusing on OS. Since last month as well, additional updates have also been released to resolve major vulnerabilities, definitely within the browser software. So the first one, we've got Chrome. They did release version 83 last month, and literally just a few days ago, a new update's already been provided, pushed for Windows, Mac, and Linux as well, so not just within Windows. The update included a number of high severity vulnerabilities in the use after free browser exploitation. Both Mozilla Firefox and Thunderbird were patched for many high severity vulnerabilities. Even though Firefox version 77 was recently released, it was only 2 days later that they had to release another update. Although there aren't any vulnerabilities for this, there were previously, so something that was resolved is within Zoom. It's an extremely popular software for both consumers and businesses, especially due to the new updates as well, the situation with many devices working from home. And it's also receiving updates frequently. The newest release added Giphy support within Zoom chat, as well as chat features and minor bug fixes. Some additional products just to highlight as well. Like always, third-party products can get released at any time. Since the last Patch Tuesday, this includes Notepad++, Citrix Workspace, Oracle VirtualBox, RealVNC, WinSCP, iTunes, FileZilla, and Wireshark. And again, just to remind all administrators, always include third-party patching within your patch management process.
That's amazing. Thank you, John. And once again, if there are third-party applications that are important to you that we are not specifically putting onto a slide, let us know and we'll do the research for you. We'll let you know what updates are important or should be important to you to make your lives a little bit easier. And of course, I imagine, John, we're going to expand these vulnerabilities and put them into some kind of table form to make it really simple to prioritize, what is important for any business. Yeah, amazing. Thank you, John. So, if you have a patching strategy, then you may be prioritizing the Patch Tuesday and third-party content based on a single or multiple factors. And we actually believe that we need 6 in order to offer the highest level. The risk for any vulnerability to an environment is based on more than just a single factor. So we have the vendor severity, and that typically runs from critical, important, all the way to low. And then we have the CVSS score. That's an independent scoring system that we're going to cover off specifically in a slide. And then you've got the second most important, in our opinion, whether or not the vulnerability is weaponized. Now, weaponized vulnerability means it's actively being used to exploit an environment, to deliver ransomware, to deliver viruses, or simply for data theft. Now, weaponized vulnerabilities are hard to track, but what happens is a vendor is informed that through one of their vulnerabilities, data is being stolen or ransomware is being used to spread. Typically, it comes via the bug bounty program, which is hugely popular. So if you have a weaponized vulnerability in the Patch Tuesday, it really ought to be prioritized. And the only thing that's more important than weaponized vulnerabilities is whether they are publicly aware. And there's actually a reason for that. Now, public aware breaks into 2 parts. You've got a publicly aware patch. The patch means that to exploit the environment, it is detailed and documented how to do so. So the distance between that being publicly aware and it actually being weaponized can actually be just a few days. But it's your sort of, it's your information that you need, it's your awareness of what could be vulnerable to you. It gives you a bit of time to strategize how you're going to deploy that patch to resolve that publicly aware vulnerability. And secondly, you've got publicly aware vulnerabilities where there is no patch, and that is a true 0-day vulnerability. Now for that, you'll need something like a security scanner or a vulnerability scanning solution, and that scans your environment for where these potential issues could exist. We don't actually cover those in the Patch Tuesday, but there are vulnerability and security scanners available that will help you. Now, the only thing that you can apply except a patch is a countermeasure, and a countermeasure exists in 2 forms. One is a mitigation. So that could be that you have a next generation antivirus. That means you don't have to prioritize that patch or risk it as, prioritize it as a risky for the deployment. And alternatively, you've got a workaround. So maybe customizing something in group policy could actually help you alleviate the need to deploy the patch. Lastly, your exposure. How much of your environment is exposed to the patch? And of course, if you have a weaponized vulnerability that only is a medium severity, but the exposure is on 95% of your environment, I would say that that is more important than a vulnerability that is critical that is only on 2% of your environment that isn't weaponized. So that's why you need a multi-factored approach when selecting and prioritizing your patches from Patch Tuesday, and that is what we're actually doing for you on our recommendation sheet on our webpage. So, Pete, you have given us a little introduction. You've given us a small introduction to CVSS before, and I know a lot of feedback we had was to go into a little bit more detail. So, over to you, Pete.
Okay, thanks very much, Rob. Yes, you're right. Last month we did just touch on the CVSS system, but we did not really go into any detail. So this month I thought that I would expand on what I started to discuss last month. Maybe a little bit of an overlap, but I don't think that's a problem at all. So CVSS is an acronym even for the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, and it was first designed. It was designed by the first CIG, which is also an acronym, and that stands for the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams special interest group. And let me tell you, that's a lot easier for you to hear than it is for me to say. It was first drafted in 2005. We're now up to version 3.1. It was designed to standardize the severity of vulnerabilities to allow security teams to prioritize the order of deployment of patches to remediate those vulnerabilities. The score goes from 0 to 10, with 10 being the most critical. There is also a descriptive score as well, critical, high, medium, that type of thing. Now, the great thing about the CVSS system is that it can be independent from the application vendor. And this basically means that a vendor of an application cannot play down the severity of a vulnerability. Furthermore, a competitor to that vendor cannot try and play up the severity of a rival's product, any vulnerabilities in a rival's product. This is one of the reasons why I believe that the CVSS system can be considered to be a trustworthy alternative to other scoring systems. Okay, so the score is calculated by making use of a set of metrics which are publicly available, and those metrics are divided into 3 groups, and Rob's showing a slide there. So we basically have the base metrics, the temporal metrics, and the environmental metrics. Now, for a vulnerability to be given a score, it must be at least assessed on the base metrics group. The other 2 groups may then modify this score that was given by the base metric group. Okay, I'm going to cover off a few examples just to give you the idea of what's going on in each one of these groups. So the base metric group, things are covered off like the attack vector. For example, can the attack be carried out across the internet or across the LAN, or must the attacker be locally logged on to the vulnerable device? The attack complexity is also in this group. This being one of the more subjective vectors, I think the CVSS system tries to keep away from subjective scoring as much as possible, but occasionally it's just not possible. Now, the attack complexity could be along the lines of, is it a single step, easy to execute attack, or is it a multi-step, difficult process to go through in order to exploit that vulnerability? Other vectors in this group include the privileges that are required and is user interaction required. Okay, so moving on, the temporal metrics group can only lower the base metric score or keep it the same. Things like the maturity of the exploit code, so that would be some code written to actually use that vulnerability, how mature that code is and how reliable that code is, that's evaluated in this group. Remediation levels are also included. For example, is there any level of remediation or a temporary fix available to patch this vulnerability? Okay, the environmental metrics group contains similar parameters to the temporal metrics, but it focuses on the actual component that is vulnerable. And for example, is it a corporate calendar or a corporate payroll database that is exposed by the vulnerability? Now, clearly the 2 do not have the same level of importance in most companies, so that's where the environmental metrics would score that accordingly. By the way, actually, there's really good videos, online videos that go into a lot of detail about the CVSS score. And I think that after watching a few of those videos, most people would really see the benefit of using this scoring system when deciding which patches and the order of patches to deploy. So yeah, that's what I got this week, Rob.
Lovely. And personally, the thing I like about the CVSS is the fact that it is independent. So you actually have an independent score of a vulnerability in addition to the vendor. You put these together, you have a better idea about what could be the most important to you.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go into what happened yesterday. We have a special page on our Syxsense.com website. So if you go to www.syxsense.com, there is a news page here, and we have everything underneath there from here, you can also have a chat to one of our techies. So in the corner, if you have any questions about Patch Tuesday, and maybe a patching strategy, you'd like some help, or you'd like to start a free trial for the Syxsense solution, you can do so from here. The news page can be subscribed to, so you don't have to remember to come to this this page on a Patch Tuesday. It can actually be emailed to you. So if you fill in your email address, it will be sent to you each and every month, or each and every time we upload any other content. So we actually are privileged to have a lot of 0-day content coming up to our webpage very, very quickly. As soon as it's announced, we actually have a team dedicated for that. Now here you'll see the June updates, so you can read more. You don't need to sign up to this. You can actually just come to the web page and check this form out. And here we'll just go through some of the more risky vulnerabilities that came out yesterday. So as I mentioned, there were 129 patches to resolve vulnerabilities across the whole Microsoft estate, including an awful lot of Windows 7 vulnerabilities as well. So if you still have Windows 7 in your estate, there are a lot of Windows 7 vulnerabilities in here. Surprisingly though, there were only 11 critical updates. So generally when you get this huge release of vulnerabilities, it sort of does give you an indication that there's been a lot of fixes. One thing that's, there's only 11 criticals, so that makes our the priorities a little bit easier. But there's 118 marked important, which is the second severity rating. So you still have an awful lot to do. Now, interestingly enough, as I mentioned, there's 129 patches yesterday. There's been over 600 for the entire year. This cadence hasn't been seen ever before. In fact, yesterday was the highest number of patches released in any month since going back as far as I can remember. And if next month they follow the same cadence, we may actually have as many patches as we had for the entire of 2019, which is just crazy to say those figures. There's a lot of headaches. It couldn't happen at a worse time. And as John said, there were 10 Adobe updates as well. Some of them very, very urgent to deploy. Now, if you have to deploy them all and you have a strategy that automatically installs every single patch, we estimate that on an average system, it's about 2.3 gigabytes of data. That takes into consideration Patch Tuesday and, of course, the first Patch Tuesday, which is all of your Office updates. But if you don't have the capacity to send 2.3 gigabytes of data, then prioritizing some of the more urgent ones is probably something that we can help you with, especially if you're using VPN or wide area networks where your users are at home and potentially on a home broadband that isn't unlimited data. So I've selected a few patches of interest. I know John and Pete have as well, but I'd just like to talk about a few that I have selected. The first one is 1281, and this is a OLE remote code execution. Now, the reason why I chose this one is OLE is actually as an object linking and embedding vulnerability. And so what this means is if you take a photo from a photo editing application on your PC and you paste that into Word, you have the ability, or this vulnerability has the capability of embedding something rogue into that. And if you then share such a document on social media or across your colleagues' machines, you can actually spread viruses really easily. Now, this has the second highest vendor severity and CVSS score combination. So for me, and the fact it impacts every single Microsoft operating system, it is absolutely urgent to prioritize that, regardless of what individually the vendor is suggesting. From my opinion, that is the most important one. I note two others which are in the same family. That's 1238 and 1239. These are media foundation memory corruption vulnerabilities. Now this impacts Windows 10 all the way through every feature update and Windows Server 2019, and it has no countermeasure. So this patch is really needed for it. And the reason why I've selected it is because this family of vulnerabilities in previous Patch Tuesdays have actually become 0-day. So there has been 0-day vulnerabilities already this year using the Media Foundation memory leakage to expose ransomware and for data theft. So I'd rather learn a lesson from already this year and prioritize that. And lastly, 1292, it's an open SSH vulnerability or patch for a vulnerability. Now this is actually quite a trendy feature of Windows 10 and 2019. So Windows Server 2019. It is a cross-platform capability to allow Windows and Linux to talk to each other. So that OpenSSH is like a command shell. Now, the reason why it's important is because if you were to add or inject some rogue code into the security settings section of the SSH system, you can actually deliver that to the Windows device and actually infect that system. So it is very important that if you are an administrator of multi-platform Windows and Linux and you are using this, you need to install this patch. It's not for everybody. It only infects the Microsoft system. It leaves your Linux untouched. But if you are an administrator and you are using this functionality in your business to support your Linux devices, then you really should prioritize this one. So those are my 4 patches of interest. I suppose, John, do you have one? Maybe I could bring one up.
I do. It's another update, CVE 2020 1219. This is, there you go, perfect. Yep, it's a Microsoft Browser memory corruption vulnerability. I chose this one specifically because it's actually across all versions of Windows, any Microsoft operating system, and specifically attacks or can attack IE for Internet Explorer as well as Microsoft Edge. So it's essentially a remote code execution vulnerability existing in the way all Microsoft browsers access objects in memory. So this can pretty much affect anyone using a Windows device, to put it simply. An attacker, and as Microsoft worded it, an attacker could host a specially crafted website that is designed to exploit the vulnerability through Microsoft browsers, as I pointed out, IE as well as Edge, and then convince the user to view the website. And this happens time and time again with many different browsers in which similar issues have occurred throughout the years within Chrome as well as Firefox, Opera, I can name a number of them. In all cases, however, an attacker would have no way to force users to view the attacker-controlled content. Instead, the attacker would have to convince the users to take action, such as an email or an instant message.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, John. And Pete, you have selected one for us as well.
I certainly do, yeah. I think in many ways it's fairly similar to the one that John mentioned, but the one I focused in on was CVE 2020-1213. It sounds similar to John's on the face of it, but basically this is a VB script remote code execution vulnerability. Now, as it happens at the time, and I talk about the CVSS score all the time, this particular patch, ironically, hasn't got a CVSS score yet, but I'm sure that will change shortly. It does have a vendor severity of critical. So going back to what you said earlier, you know, having more than one method of selecting patches, this is where this could become useful. You know, this doesn't have a CVSS score, but the vendor is at least admitting to it being critical. I'm sure CVSS will come up with something very similar. Anyway, this vulnerability exists due to the way that the VB script engine handles objects in memory. Basically, a web-based attack scenario, the attacker could host a specially crafted website designed to exploit this vulnerability through Internet Explorer. The user would have to visit a website in order for this vulnerability to be exposed. In addition to that, an ActiveX control can also be used to manipulate an application or a Microsoft Office document that hosts the IE rendering engine, basically again exposing the vulnerability. And to sum up, really, that any website could contain specially crafted code to exploit this vulnerability.
Lovely. And it's really interesting, actually, that the CVSS score hasn't been assigned to it yet. It doesn't mean that it's not going to. So
exactly.
if you, yes. So, and one thing that from the questions that we were sent, the score that that is given here is independent. And sometimes it just takes a few days, a little bit of time for that agency to review the vulnerability, then to assign the CVSS. So if it changes, we will know about it, and it will be updated on this page to help you prioritize your patches. Everything that we are recommending here has a yes in this column, and that is what we are recommending you should prioritize if you have bandwidth restrictions or issues. And like I said, just because a vendor has given a severity of critical doesn't mean for us it is the most important. That's why the one at the top has the 8.8 CVSS score and an important vendor severity under it, and that's the one I mentioned. So brilliant, thank you guys. So what are we gonna we're going to cover off some feature updates next. So, John, you've actually done a lot of research. I just want to point out that this is this slide actually came from the Microsoft site. I just want to say this first. Feature update support changes a lot. There have already been major changes to the availability of support for feature updates already this year. So please, if you want to find out more information, do a search for Windows Lifecycle Fact Sheet. It is the most up-to-date one I have found that provides all of the feature updates and their expiry based on the version. So hopefully, John, I haven't said what you're going to say.
Oh, that's perfect. It's yeah. From this, the grid that you provided, actually, a few things to point out. There are a few dates provided for some older, I call them interim versions of feature versions, because they're not fully unsupported, but there are definitely newer versions available for new features as well as new security enhancements. A few of the dates to point out, there are actually two columns, and as stated as well on the previous Patch Tuesday webinar, it's because they get two different life cycles between the different editions. And in general, they're put as consumer editions as well as business editions. Consumer consists of Home and Pro, business consists of Enterprise or Education, and they usually get a longer life cycle. I'll go into the latest version as well as some of its differences as well, but I do want to still point out that old versions, especially the ones that you see in red on this screen that Rob's provided, if it's in a red date, it is no longer supported and you cannot patch them. So if you have an old version, whether it's a consumer version or a business, even though business lasts a little longer, they need to be updated as soon as possible. Feature updates are, again, upgrades to the operating system, not just a few patches, not just a few enhancements, but actually extending the life of the OS. Few to point out, though, that have actually been extended due to the COVID pandemic, and simply just the inability for many organizations to easily and efficiently, as well as effectively, push out those versions, since many organizations sent devices home. Few of those dates are listed with asterisks. They were actually set to expire recently. Actually, a few of them would have already expired in April. So they have been extended till the end of the year. That's just a slight buffer. These are also still interim versions. There are multiple versions still available that are newer than that most organizations should be looking towards testing and rolling out to all of the other devices within the fleet. Do you have another slide, Rob? Like to move forward?
I do, and I've done a bit of work on this, but is there a period of time from when they release the feature update to when it ends their support?
Yeah, it's typically the consumer versions are going to last 18 months, and
18 months.
the enterprise versions or business organizational versions, a few different words for it, are going to last around 30. That's actually a good point because the latest release with 2004 has actually been standardized, so there is no difference between its life cycle. Both versions, or I should say both editions, will expire on the same date, December 14th, 2021. And they did the same thing with 1909 a few versions ago, in which there was no difference. They kept it, pretty simple to say this is going to expire at the same date for both editions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, John.
Yep. And I believe there's some other versions. Yep, perfect for long-term support. Just wanted to highlight for anyone using Windows 10 Enterprise 2015 long-term service branch, that is actually set to end its mainstream support at the end of this year, near the end of this year. So that should definitely be highlighted that although it is fully supported until 2025, it's not going to be receiving the same level of support as the newer versions.
And that's actually like the patches, isn't it? So that's like patches, and then you have to keep feature updates on top of that, and then patch on top of feature updates. So it can be a bit confusing, but as long as you stay within the support dates, you should be
absolutely.
okay.
You'll still be receiving the major security fixes. Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so I think we have a few questions come through. So it's actually a little bit longer than last week, but if you'd like us to maybe cover a little bit more content in the next one, please let us know either through the chat or through the webpage. We'd love to answer any questions that you have sent through so far.
Great, thank you, Rob. We do have a few questions. One of them is, how come some of your updates from May are not available in Windows Update?
Could you circle back to that one? I'll find out. I'll explain, but I need to find a web page first to show you.
Okay, sure. Okay, next question is, does Microsoft release updates once per month?
Rob, I believe you addressed this earlier, is that they do not release them once per month. It can actually be multiple weeks throughout the month. Patch Tuesday lies in the second week, but there are clearly multiple releases first week as well as the end of the month, which I think you put as for the .NET framework updates. So the definitions can actually be released multiple times.
Yeah, exactly. Just to answer that question, I just did a search for May. I haven't actually got the example here, but this is the official Microsoft support page for a particular KB. I've just chosen it from random. Basically, if you go down this screen, it actually explains in the release channel that Microsoft is offering these patches. Now, you can see here, there are three channels. The one which is Windows Update and Microsoft Update. That's actually what you'll get on your PC. Now, there are reasons why Microsoft will not publish to a Windows Update or a Microsoft Update on the device itself. It might be that it has manual intervention. It might be that it has specific hardware requirements. So if you have those hardware requirements, you have to manually go to the Microsoft Update catalog, which I know is a bit of a pain. I know from our product, we always publish everything that is in the Microsoft Update catalog, and that is available for everybody. So the detection logic will identify this is a HP, it needs the HP update version of that patch, or if it's a Dell or a Lenovo, it will go and grab the individual one, something that maybe the Windows Update and the Microsoft Update isn't able to dynamically detect. So I hope that answers that question.
Great answer, Rob. Thank you. A few more questions, guys. How many zero-day updates were released this month?
Luckily for us, there weren't any, except there was a Mozilla Firefox that is almost classified as a 0-day. It has a 9.8 vulnerability CVSS score, so that is as close to a 0-day as you can get. But luckily for us, there weren't any 0 days released this month.
Okay, great. I'm going to add in one from chat right now. It says, if I deploy the cumulative update for Windows 10, which is KB4560960, does that include all the CVEs that are released by Microsoft, or do I need to deploy the CVEs individually?
John, that one for you?
Yes, it does knock out previous CVEs. Due to Microsoft patch supersedence, it's a silly saying, but updates do update updates, and at some point the update will then become obsolete and of course replaced, and that would knock out the previous vulnerabilities.
Yeah, so I think actually that is a.
I think you can see that sometimes, John. Rob, I was just going to say, Rob, you can see that sometimes when you do a Windows update, and it says, and it obviously patches get deployed to a device, and you then run the update again, and the device then becomes vulnerable to more patches that it wasn't actually vulnerable to previously, which is a little annoying and amusing at the same time. But yeah, you know, it's just one of the quirks.
Patching the patch, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You just you sort of you have to wonder sometimes, don't you?
Yeah, that's a really great question.
All right, we have yeah, absolutely. We have a few more questions. How often should companies prioritize Microsoft updates?
Okay.
All the time.
I think, yeah. I think it is a balancing act, though, between obviously the bandwidth required, potential disruption to end users, but it is definitely, you know, you want to be erring on the side of getting those patches out there. I think with a lot of our customers, I'd say they're doing patches. Quite a lot of our customers are doing them every single day, aren't they? As a bare minimum, I would say once a week. You want to be pushing patches.
Yeah. From my perspective, sorry, John, I'll come to you in a second. From my perspective, we help a lot of our customers understand that you don't just have to install everything at once. You know, every patch is important. If it's resolving a security flaw, as we know, any vulnerability can become weaponized at any point. So you do have to be very dynamic. If you have a tool set that is really flexible, and there are many tool sets available, then you can selectively choose the most critical ones and deploy them first, followed up by the next and the next and the next. So every patch is really very important, because we've seen in the past a vulnerability that is low severity be used to distribute the most horrendous ransomware that exists. So you don't always need to deploy everything together. Yes, the bandwidth is still going to be the same, but you can be selective and choose and prioritize in a very efficient way.
I think a term that we use, Rob, is adding patches to your baseline, isn't it? So it's building up a baseline of patches over a period of time till eventually you're including every single patch, but you haven't rolled them all out all in one go. You've built that baseline up. That also helps reduce there's somewhat of a risk mitigation in that process as well. Much less likely to overload a device. And we've certainly seen with Windows 10, it can complain if you start pushing 30 or 40 patches down to it all in one go. You can get random reboots, patches just fail to install, things like that. So yeah, there's definitely thought needs to be put into that. Sorry, JC, John, you were going to add to that?
No, that's okay. That was actually perfect. Use a great term, baseline. I've used this term for some time, learned it in college. It doesn't apply towards any technical area. I think it's particularly management and marketing, but it's a trade-off between efficiency and effectiveness. And really, you should be putting effectiveness first in your process, which is to use that baseline. It's to test, it's to make sure that your patching process, if we look at it simply in a monthly cycle, should be effective first to eliminate any problems. Once you've gone through your phased approach, whether it be pushing through to virtual machines or to select certain candidates as a representative sample within your organization, if the patches are successful there, and those are the same types of chassis types that may exist throughout the rest of the organization, well, then you can focus on efficiency by getting that out to production, which would be for everyone else in the organization, because you have vetted them first, you have ensured that you'll have minimal issues, and really that trade-off is very important.
Great, thank you guys. Another question is, what's the best way to perform version upgrades?
For the version upgrades, it kind of goes along the same process as what we just mentioned.
Would this be feature updates?
Feature updates. It would be for testing them first, and especially to test. I mean, even with the patching process, you want to vet the updates first, but with an upgrade, you definitely want to vet all the new features too, because these are features that aren't going to be behind the lines that end users may or may not see. They are going to see them. They're going to notice that, for example, over the years, version or areas of the operating system have been phased out, where Windows 10 and Windows 7 shared those features. They're going away. And so for a lot of the different areas and avenues that an end user can take on the PC, that alone is going to affect an end user, as well as any other potential issues. Like with every new version, there could be some driver conflicts for older peripherals, older accessories, and these again should be vetted first. So the number one thing that at least I would recommend, and you guys can chime in as well, is to always vet them first. Make sure that you're not just testing on virtual machines. That is not an accurate way to test a feature upgrade. You want to test on actual devices within the organization, because it is more about the hardware itself as well as the software and application conflicts, like accounting software, like business processing. Are they going to pose a conflict? Test them first, choose a few end users within the organization. If it is successful after a certain amount of time, we call it a feedback period, maybe a week or so, then go ahead and start phasing to everyone else. The actual delivery, a bunch of different forms for that. The easiest is simply just go to Windows Update, but there are of course many solutions out there, as well as Syxsense alone, to be able to deliver that in, well, an effective process, to be able to do it in a phased approach, as well as to make it efficient.
Yeah, I'll just add to that as well. It may even be a situation where you have to have different ISOs for different hardware for different devices, and that's not insignificant. You know, these images are well over 4 gig in size, so you don't want to be deploying that to a device and then find out that the update failed anyway. That's rather disappointing, to say the least. So testing up front would certainly help on that side of things.
Yeah, guys, that's brilliant answers. Thank you.
Yeah, great question, Brent. Thank you. That could honestly be its own webcast, actually. A lot of content there. Last question. So far, unless anybody else wants to ask another one, why do some vendors release a different risk rating than the CVSS score?
Okay, I guess that's aimed at me. Hopefully I did sort of cover that off. But at the end of the day, a vendor does have their own idea about the severity of a vulnerability, but we have to bear in mind that they're trying to sell a piece of software quite often, and they may have slightly different priorities, or advert for their product saying, hey, we've got these huge vulnerabilities in our product. The CVSS system really doesn't care who the vendor is. Any vulnerability goes through an algorithm, which is those 3 metrics groups, and a score comes out of that at the end of the day. Furthermore, the CVSS score can change throughout the life cycle of that vulnerability. And remember, we're talking about vulnerabilities here, not actual patches. The patch is what you deploy. The CVSS is based on the vulnerability itself. But if that vulnerability is being exploited, it will be reassessed, and that may well push the score up. Once a patch comes out for that vulnerability, that may well push the score down. And it's all calculated within that algorithm, which is publicly available. And in fact, some CVS scores are even when they're released, the vectors are given as well, so you can see the actual calculation that was used to carry out to get that score. Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to add
John,
to that as well. I've looked at this for some time, especially when just looking at simply between industry rating and vendor rating and vendor rating can sometimes be biased. Now, there's nothing wrong with that because it will take into account also user experience. And that is, of course, very important for that particular vendor when rating their own updates. Industry will typically, as Pete mentioned, more focus on the vulnerability itself, the security risk. What else can potentially occur if this is not patched? But vendor rating can be sometimes a little bit higher. There's nothing, again, wrong with that. If you look at it in terms of risk, it may not be concerned with risk, but it could be due to the functionality of the machine itself, or even with third-party updates, whether the product will simply work or it's going to have a few issues.
That's brilliant, brilliant, guys. I couldn't add any more to it. Great question.
Okay, well, we don't have any more questions coming through on chat. Do you guys want to take us out? Have a follow-up or?
Yeah. So if you have if you do not have a patching strategy, or you'd like to find some more details about how we're able to offer a solution and a patching strategy, just go to the Syxsense.com website, and you can have the chat function in the corner. You can send across any questions you have, even if it's related to anything you've seen today.
Great, thank you so much, guys. Thank you to our attendees and our panelists for your time. This is being recorded, and we will be sending it out later today to everybody who registered. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Have a great day. See you next month.